Support for this podcast comes from the law firm of Davis Malm. Whether you're a developer, property owner, manager, or commercial tenant, their real estate attorneys know the lay of the land, not just the law. Learn more at davismalm.com.
WBUR Podcasts, Boston.
I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Common. WBUR Senior Health and Science Reporter, Gabrielle Emanuel. Welcome back.
Hi, it's good to be here.
So, Gabriella, a little while ago, you and I spoke after Governor Maura Healey had just declared that a state of emergency exists in the state's family shelter system. And that is partially because of the number of migrant families coming to Massachusetts in need of shelter and services. Now, you've been on top of this, and we're going to discuss some of your reporting. But I want to start us off with a piece you did about the difficulties families are having enrolling their children in school, right? So as the school year begins, Gabriella, talk to us about what these families are going through to get their kids into these classrooms.
Yeah, so there are a couple different challenges here. One is that the state-funded family shelter system is beyond capacity. Like you mentioned, the governor declared a state of emergency, and one of these issues here is that there aren't enough shelter placements. So the state is placing families in overflow hotels and motels, and some of them don't have the usual shelter staff. And it's those staff members that often play a key role in helping families get set up, including with school enrollment. So that is a challenge. Another is that some families are actually hesitant themselves to enroll their kids in school because they don't know how long they'll be in a hotel or motel placement. Mm-hmm. It could be a day, a week, a year. That's giving some of them pause. And then finally, a big issue is getting these children vaccinated.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of vaccinations are we talking?
Routine childhood vaccinations. This is not the flu or COVID vaccines. This is things like measles, mumps, chickenpox, the things any kid would get if they're growing up here in the U.S. And many of these kids have actually got their vaccines, but their records are not in the state system, and they might need a few of the vaccines still.
Okay. Why is it so difficult making sure these children are vaccinated?
The reality is there is a federal law and there is state guidance that children who are experiencing homelessness should enroll in school even without their vaccination records. This should not be a barrier. Mm-hmm. However, on the ground, advocates have been telling me that some schools are resisting enrolling kids over this vaccine issue. Now, there are a few options of where to get your vaccine, but I've been hearing that people are booking appointments months out. The Department of Public Health for the state has mobilized to get these kids vaccinations, but it only really began in earnest very recently. Shots started going out this past week. I spoke with Dawn Fukuda at the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and she told me that there is a lot of groundwork that had to take place before the vaccination teams could go out.
You know, they needed time to order those vaccines. We needed time to make sure they could properly store and handle them. So there was a fair amount of quality assurance that needed to go into our preparation to make sure these interventions could be delivered responsibly.
So my understanding is that vaccines are now being brought to family shelter sites. However, this started after school started. So I've heard that many kids are having a delayed start to the school year.
Got it. I want to kind of focus on what this means for the families in general, right? Because school is a place where kids go to learn and socialize, but there are some other important reasons for families to get their kids into schools. So tell me how that's affecting the families themselves, that these kids can't go to school.
Yeah. So one shelter provider put it this way to me. She said, if you don't have a stable home, your school becomes your stable home. So in many ways, school is particularly important for these children. Another issue is that many of these kids don't speak English and haven't had formal schooling, or they've had interrupted schooling. So getting that time in school to catch up is really critical, and kind of having a delayed start sets them back even further.
So they're missing out on that much needed stability right now at this point.
Exactly.
Is there any help, any additional help, I should say, coming to these families to help them navigate our school system?
The state has activated up to 250 National Guard members to help in these unstaffed hotel and motel sites. One of the things they're supposed to be doing is helping connect these families to school and doing school enrollment. That is all just getting underway right now. So it is a work in progress.
You've also reported recently that there's some tension between some municipalities and the state for where and how they're placing families in their communities.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
What is going on there?
So let me start by saying more than 80 cities and towns around the Commonwealth currently have shelter placements. So this is either a shelter or a hotel or motel site. And many of these cities and towns have said they have not been notified by the state when they place unhoused families in their community. In Bedford, I spoke with Heidi Porter, who heads the town's Health and Human Services. She said that in early August, the police got a 911 call from a hotel. The police showed up. There was a language barrier. So the officers went to the hotel management to try and find the name of the person who was renting the room to write it in their police report. And that's when they discovered the room was rented to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And these were actually families in the shelter system staying in that hotel. And they discovered there were 17 families they had no idea about staying there. That number has since grown to 66. And there is no shelter provider. So there's nobody providing their basic needs like food and clothing. And the town, Bedford, had to step up and start kind of acting as a shelter provider. Here is Porter.
We need more help. We really do. We need this to be a little bit more organized. It would have been helpful to have a heads up.
A spokesperson for the Healey administration says they try to notify local officials, but they are making these hotel and motel placements throughout the day and into the night. And they said this is a fast-moving emergency.
Yeah. How does this lack of communication between municipalities and the state impacting the families? Are they still able to get some kind of assistance through this? Yeah,
it's a good question. It is far from ideal. I have heard about groups of families that don't speak English and thus haven't been able to figure out where the state is providing food for them, for example. Usually there's a shelter provider, and one of the things they do is provide translators so that, these families can communicate. These families did end up finding their food, but it took a while, and it just shows that communication with these families is really key, and the state hasn't quite been able to keep up with providing shelter providers for these locations.
We're going to take a break, but we'll be right back.
Politics has never been stranger or more online, which is why the politics team at Wired is making a new show, Wired Politics Lab. It's all about how to navigate the endless stream of news and information and what to look out for. Each week on the show, we'll dig into far-right platforms, AI chatbots, influencer campaigns, and so much more. Wired Politics Lab launches Thursday, April 11th. Follow the show wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back with more from Gabrielle. Further complicating this situation, there have been some anti-immigrant protests occurring at some of the places where the families are being housed. Talk to us about that. Who's behind these demonstrations? Where are they taking place? What's being done? Talk to us about it.
Yeah. So what we know is about 4 demonstrations so far at this point. Several were in Woburn a few weeks ago. Then there was one in Marlborough about a week ago. And what's happening is about 24 people are outside the hotels. These are hotels where the state has rented rooms for unhoused families. Looks like on the videos posted by bystanders, these are men wearing black shirts, masks. Their whole faces are covered. And they are chanting, shouting things like, "Refugees, go home." Refugees, go home! They have a big sign that reads, "Invaders, go home." These have been identified as a neo-Nazi organization called NSC 131.
And this is one of the groups in the state that state officials are keeping an eye on, right?
Yes, they have been on their radar for a while now. It is a locally founded hate group, and their stated mission is genocide. It's to wipe out people of color, Jewish people, and LGBTQ people from New England. Experts that I've spoken to say they're focusing particularly on the family shelter system lately, pointing out that there are new arrivals, particularly families from Haiti, coming into the system. And that seems to be why they've been staging these demonstrations outside of hotels and motels.
What are local and state officials doing to protect these families?
Yeah, so I reached out to the Attorney General's office. They said they are concerned. However, they cannot confirm or deny an investigation. Governor Maura Healey sent me a statement that firmly said these groups do not represent Massachusetts. I also spoke with the mayor of Marlborough, Arthur Vigent. He said that he expects to see more of this. He says his police force has increased patrols by the hotels and motels. But he also said the welcoming sentiment, we have seen kind of groups mobilizing to put out statements and insist that Massachusetts is a welcoming place. He said that there needs to be honest conversations about the limited resources here in Massachusetts. We are the only state that has a law saying eligible families should get shelter, and he would actually like to see that law repealed.
The legislature in Massachusetts simply needs to take a vote to not be a right to shelter state. We're the only ones in the country. We got to help the people we have here first, and there's always going to be opportunities to help others, but we are having a housing crisis here as it is.
So he was firmly against the demonstrations that are happening and terrifying many of these families. However, he did say these candid conversations need to take place.
How are the families themselves reacting to all of this?
Yeah, I think it's been hard for many of them. I spoke with one mother who was at one of the hotels where the neo-Nazi demonstrations happened, and she said it was terrifying. She said she was afraid. Just recalling that night to me, she said she was shaking. Still, now, many days later, she won't let her children go outside to play for fear that the men in masks will return. She was hoping for a different, placement after this incident. But when she went to kind of the field office, they hadn't actually heard about the incident happening. So I do think there are a lot of different dynamics at play right now.
Gabriella, what will you be looking for in the future?
So I'll be interested how the National Guard change things if they do. I've heard some people say 250 National Guard members is not sufficient. I've heard other groups, shelter providers in particular, call for the governor to activate MEMA, the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, to kind of orchestrate and organize things. They stepped up during the COVID emergency, and some shelter providers would like to see their expertise tapped again. So far, the governor has not done that. I'll be curious to see the governor's next steps and whether she ends up going that route.
Understood. Well, Gabriella, thank you so much for taking the time to come through and talk to The Common. We really, really appreciate your coverage on this story. Thank you.
Always good to talk with you.
That's WBUR Senior Health and Science reporter Gabrielle Emanuel. And that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Common. If you want to get in touch with us, hit us up on Instagram at WBUR The Common or send us an email at thecommon@wbur.org. I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.